Welcome to Purple Couch, where purple cushions bold conversations. My name is Zenzile Hlongwane. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager looking after public relations and internal marketing at Hollard. Welcome to our episode where we're going to be speaking to Shahil Jawar, who is the Business Unit Head for Trade and Construction Guarantees, I think it is.
Yes, Trade and Construction Guarantees.
There we go. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for this warm welcome and this magnificent location we get to call home, right?
Yes, isn't it just wonderful?
It's brilliant, yeah.
So, talking about locations, Shahil, can you just give us a sense of where we can start? We're going to be talking construction today, and given that this is your area of focus, what is the scale of the construction industry in South Africa particularly?
But the construction industry has a significant impact on our economy, both in South Africa and the rest of Africa. If we're looking at the construction industry, it encompasses a various amount of activities, from your small-scale residential to your commercial, as well as your large infrastructure development projects. The construction industry employs 1.2 million people within the South African context. Okay? It's quite a significant impact. And through government investment spend as well as public-private partnerships, the construction industry is looking to contribute 3.5% to GDP.
Wow.
You would have heard the recent budget speech by government where they've earmarked 500 billion, a focus on spend in transport, energy, as well as our ports.
Right. What are the main challenges then facing us, given that it's so big, the scale? Can we just look at that, what the main challenges are facing the construction industry, particularly where it relates to insurers?
So as cliche as this may sound, there's a lot of challenges in the industry, from corruption within the tender process to delays on projects, to input costs increasing with tariffs.
And you've mentioned a couple of big things there, the amount that the government has put aside towards the investment, contribution to GDP, and the fact that it's actually impacting such a large sector of the economy. So with what you've mentioned around government spending and the plans set to roll out over the next few years, what kind of opportunities do you see this creating for the industry?
So again, there's a number of opportunities, both direct and indirect. The two focused areas for me is the infrastructure spend is going to speak to unemployment, right? So unemployment figures decreasing, so that's quite important for me. And then the enabling of other industries. So through infrastructure spend, I build a renewable energy plant. I've now created capacity within the grid, which enables other businesses indirectly. Or for me, the most important opportunities that I see within the space.
The flip side of that are the risks. What do you see as some of the risks for the industry?
But I think that the most, or the risk that's affected or has the most material impact on the awarding of projects is the way we award them. So the accountability through the tender process, the accountability once the project is awarded, the consequence for not following proper regulation. So the challenge has always been the alleged corruption within the tender process.
What are the impact of these challenges on the broader social and economic environment?
I think that's a very important question, and I think that the answer to that is the impact is significant. From a financial point of view, is these disruptions cost local contractors and community funds that they would never recover for standing. You have the financial impact to the extent where you have these disruptions in a long-tail environment, cause the contractors to go into business rescue and liquidations in certain scenarios. So that means business rescue liquidations means loss of jobs, suppliers taking compromises for their debt. So there's a ripple effect in terms of the impact. Now, once you move past the financial impact, you tend to look at the social impact seems to have a more significant or material impact. So to give you an example, is some of the impact that we see as significant is loss of life, intimidation, but loss of profits in the project. You've got delays in projects. So if me and you think about this, right, is government is trying to build infrastructure to correct the wrongs of the past, right? So to provide our people with dignity, to provide basic services like water, education. So you now have a project that's awarded to build a school where there was never a school. I'm not sure about you, but when anything new is coming around my community, I'm quite excited.
Yes.
Now you can understand is that people and the community after 20, 30 years are looking forward to the school, and now the school is not built. So the impact is quite astronomical. I think both from a physical point of view, from an emotional point of view, which we sometimes forget. Right? I definitely think that the impact is there, and that's besides a project being built of poor quality. So you could get a school that's built of poor quality and collapses. The impact is quite deep, and it's quite true to what people experience on the ground.
I like the idea of the long tail that you mentioned, that it's not just in the immediate future, but it has long-term consequences because, people, communities, children are affected by this, whether it's a school or a clinic or a hospital that's meant to be built and it doesn't get built, So based on your experience, have construction businesses responded to these disruptions?
Yes, they have, and I think I'm not sure if it's by choice, but they've had to respond, right? Because this materially affects their business. So any disruption within a project costs the contractor funds, right? Because they're standing fixed costs that you cannot get away from.
Yeah.
So the impact has been significant in construction companies, which has forced them to seek intervention. If we're looking at specific types of events like disruptions, community unrest, what contractors have done is they've looked to government and law enforcement agencies for intervention. If you're looking at some of the cost pressures for input costs within the construction space, you've seen construction companies develop strategies around that to try and combat that. The one thing that I have experienced in the market is, as South African contractors, we're extremely resilient. There's always find a way to make this work in simple terms. And I find that the resilience in the market to take care of all these outside factors is always trying to find a solution.
Okay. And is that something that's becoming a norm now, or is that something that's resulted out of the disruptions that have been experienced in the sector?
So I think it's a combination of. So you've seen these companies be resilient to other factors. The construction mafia, as we term it, or the local community, has been a recent event in our history, and something that's popped up relatively recently affecting construction companies.
Imagine you've explained this to me as a consumer, as a policy holder, but I imagine that it's slightly different for a business, be it a small business or a big business. What are some of the examples that you can give us there to contextualize it so that people understand? Because we've spoken about how it could impact society and what some of those things are, and maybe an example of what insurance guarantees in those environments could be.
Okay, so quite often, or the majority of our business is for government contracts. This is to give you the impact of the guarantee being bad and not honoring, or the impact of not having a guarantee is potentially you've got wastage of tax funds or taxpayers' funds. We all understand we don't have enough money to spend in South Africa at this point, right? So the more leakage you have, the less you have to spend. So the guarantee enables that part and provides comfort to the beneficiary, as well as enabling the contractor to complete the works and not have any cash flow issues through the retentions.
Right. So enabling them to start and end the project, because sometimes there is a bit of a delay, be it for whatever reason, just to try and cover whatever risks may arise, for lack of a better word, out of that.
Yes, and I think an important point is it's to cover those risks. And back to the cash flow, is if there's no guarantee, what happens is Eskom, as you build, as they pay you, they'll keep some money back. Sometimes the money they keep back is greater than your margins. So now in an environment or in an economy that's developing, access to capital is extremely difficult for a large part of the market, right? So by issuing this guarantee, the employer no more retains and pays the contractor the full amount on that certificate. So that's how we enable cash flow, indirectly taking care of challenges for SMEs to access capital, for example, say, through the traditional channels. Yeah, that would be the product, and simplistically how it would enable and create value throughout the chain.
Shahil, we've really spoken quite a bit around some of the things that could be done to resolve the challenges, but I think you've mentioned an idea around dialogue, and I really just want to amplify that in terms of what are the different pieces that the various stakeholders could start to own. What is your sense of that?
The dialogue is important, and why the dialogue is important is for people to understand their spaces within that. And I think dialogue is important because it allows for a different perspective in terms of understanding how to make this work. At the end of the day, all the parties within that specific supply chain need this to work, right? So for me, is the dialogue is important, because I think we've been shadowed by the rogue element in terms of the so-called construction mafia, but I do believe that there are other elements that the dialogue is going to bring out. So for example's sake, is part of those part of that grouping or so-called local community are legit local communities. So government says that part of our contract is to enable local development, which is a noble cause, and it speaks to our agenda. A lot of the defenses for the local community in disrupting projects is that we do not get what government is intended for us. So you can see that the rogue element is coming in because there's a loophole or there's a gap in that, right? And there's potentially could be a very legit community.
Right, that stands to benefit.
That stands to benefit. And through this dialogue, we're able to get parties in the same room. So at the moment, I believe that it's quite difficult. I mean, let's think about it. If there's a rogue element and you're being intimidated, it's quite difficult to have constructive conversations. Right? If you think about it. So I think that you need some sort of mediation, right?
Right.
And I think that through this mediation, people also need to understand is there's law regulating us, and that there will be consequences for breaking the law effectively. Right? So I think all of those elements need to come through, and that will come through to constructive collaboration, constructive dialogue.
You were mentioning the rogue element and how the rogue element is basically taking over everything else that the dialogue could fix. So I think maybe let's unpack that a little bit more for us.
So I think at the moment we're dealing only with the rogue element. So if you look at all the interventions, it's through law enforcement, right? And I do believe that there's a wider spectrum to what we've grouped as the construction mafia, right? In order to understand that wider spectrum of people who are really not benefiting from local spend, right, or local development, we need to have constructive dialogue, constructive conversations, constructive collaboration to find a solution that takes care, or it's a win-win-win for all parties.
I like what you did with the constructive dialogue, constructive construction, conversations. There's something in there that we can unpack. Wow, there's quite a lot for the construction industry there.
You could see me trying to remember all, yeah?
Shahil, thank you so much for joining us today and for unpacking what it is that we can actually focus on around the construction industry, some of the disruptions, the potential opportunities that are in the industry, but also the risks that we can start to look at, but particularly some of the products, that solutions that Hollard has for some of these disruptions in the industry. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you so much for joining us for today's edition of The Purple Couch, and I hope that you've enjoyed this one with Shahil. Join us for our next episode. See you next time.